Welcome to another episode of Medicare Industry Insider. I'm Rachel Brandmeier.
And I'm Jalen Jackson.
And we are going to do a special 3-part series. We're going to go over what Medicare and the insurance industry is going to look like in a Trump era. We're going to basically go over executive, judicial, and legislative updates. So this particular episode is over judicial. I'm going to struggle the whole time on that word. What we're going to do is dive into the governmental branches, talk through what it means, what the insurance industry looks like, and of course, sprinkle in a little bit of speculation.
Absolutely. And I think, the good news is, unlike almost every other president, we have a little bit of a preview because this is Trump 2, the second Trump administration. So we've got a pretty good idea of what things might look like between cabinet appointments, between what legislative priorities are going to look like under a GOP trifecta, and in the judicial branch, looking at some of the things that happened during the first Trump administration, some of the things that happened over the past 4 years of the Biden administration, and how that may affect or inform policy going forward. But the big thing is the judicial branch. Why do we care so much about that? Where, normally we talk a lot about legislation, about regulations. Why does the judicial branch play such a strong role in the insurance industry? It's the court system. It's resolution of problems. When we feel that there is a government agency that has overstepped their authority, when we feel that there is an unjust law in the books, when something is happening in the marketplace that shouldn't be happening, the judicial system is where we go for relief. A lot of companies may not be able to make that direct impact, a direct appeal to a government agency as effectively, but while fast is a relative term while you're talking about the judicial system, sometimes suing a government agency, taking them to court over a policy issue can be faster than just working through normal lobbying channels and trying to influence the direction of regulation or legislation.
100%. It's like Jalen said, it's going to be a different direction that you can influence it, but a lot of times it is a faster, I'm air quoting, direction to go. The other thing we'll look at is judge appointments. They are in the Supreme Court and federal district courts appointed by the president. So that is something that we'll look at as well in terms of how that affects the jurisprudence in the future, what we're looking through. The other big thing that when we were looking through court-appointed judges by the president, there are specific areas that are more pro-business-ish because the President Trump in his first term had appointed majority of Republican or conservative judges. So one of the big spots that we see a lot of insurance litigation is in the Texas Northern District Court.
Absolutely.
Very heavy Republican favoring judges in that area, which means that pro-business type things get pushed through. So we'll talk through that also. And some of the places where those court cases were filed. But I do want the first case that we go through to be something that Jalen kicks us off because as a fellow angler, I'll let you have the angle on this.
Yeah.
Because it is regarding, it started off with a fishing company that then trickled down into the Chevron doctrine and into our industry. And I'll let you kind of go into that particular case and how it affects us.
Yeah, so if you haven't caught on from all of that teaser, we're talking about the Loper Bright case. So Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimundo, the Supreme Court case that happened during the Biden administration, and it challenged the long-held Chevron deference doctrine. So this idea that government agencies have broad authority to make regulations and interpret the will of Congress when they pass legislation. And this severely challenged that doctrine. And in fact, the herring fishermen of Loper Bright Enterprises won their case, overturning 40 plus years of regulatory deference and opening up the government to a lot more speculation, a lot more skepticism, a lot more exposure in the courts to their rulemaking processes. So this is considered a pretty cornerstone moment in our judicial system where this really changes the case law, changes the precedent of what can be brought to court, what is a cause of action. So Loper Bright was not just about herring fishermen. It was not just about whether or not they should pay the wages of federal inspectors. It was about all government agencies and to what extent they can just have carte blanche when making regulations. So because of this, we have seen a ton of new lawsuits challenging everything from CMS and HHS to the EPA and other government agencies on a variety of issues. And this is cornerstone case happened during the Biden administration predominantly, but it is definitely going to inform decisions all through the second Trump administration, and we're likely to continue to see more and more action against government agencies because of it.
Yeah, so it's pretty neat because of the Chevron doctrine being basically overturned because of this. And it allows judges to make more of their own informed decisions and allows them to determine if that agency, the government agency, is acting with its authority. So what we then saw, next domino, everything's going to be dominoes. Next domino is the ABC lawsuit. So the Americans for Beneficiary Choice sued the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, actually in Texas. So that goes back to different places where court cases can be filed in Texas, basically suing CMS for a lot of different reasons. There were several things basically that as an agent, questioning the role of an agent, questioning if agents should be getting paid. There's a lot of other details that went into that. But that case did get it won temporarily. And we keep hearing the word won, but that doesn't always mean won. It means there's going to be multiple cases. Essentially what that did is it put a stay on the final rule, going backwards a year and basically continuing on as normal with paying agents and going forward.
Mm-hmm.
They're continuing to have additional court cases throughout 2025. And so we will see the ABC group continue to work on fighting that as well.
So jumping ahead in our show notes, but we're going to jump backwards a half a second before we go through some more of these lawsuits. It's really important to understand what the possible outcomes are for some of these federal court cases. So jumping into that, we're going to talk about two main things. So we'll talk about wins, we'll talk about stays and injunctions. So most of the time when a lawsuit is filed, there is the end goal, which is a win, overturning a law, overturning regulation, saying that you cannot do this, federal agency. This is not a fair or just law or regulation to create. But a part of these lawsuits is oftentimes making sure that while the court case is playing out, which can take years, but while that court case is playing out, making sure that irreparable harm does not occur. So that's where you see people file for stays and injunctions. So a stay just means while this court case is going on, you cannot implement this rule, this regulation. And that's what happened in the ABC case. HHS was sued based on the compensation rule in the CMS final rule last year. A stay was put in place by the federal courts to prevent CMS from actually implementing that rule while the court case was going on. Now, the good news for something like that is typically a stay or an injunction is only granted if the courts think that there's a better than average chance that the plaintiff might prevail. So that does bode well for that lawsuit. And it also means that they think allowing the regulation to go into effect while the court case is still being adjudicated could potentially create irreparable harm to the plaintiffs or similarly situated individuals. So that's all that means. The stay just means that while we hash it out in court, nothing changes. And that's really a common tactic in many of these lawsuits is like, let's just press the pause button while we sort this out in court. It may take years, but we just want to make sure no one is harmed while we're arguing these cases on the merits.
That can be what we went back to of like the quicker solution. If there is a major change that can be harmful, a stay is a really good option. If that can potentially be a win. So in this particular case, the ABC case, a stay happened, and that was looked at as a win because it allowed everything to be business as normal. Let's continue on, and let's not implement that in the final rule. So we're going to continue in 2025 to see outcomes and more court cases regarding that particular thing.
Absolutely. So we've seen a lot of others, not necessarily directly implicating Medicare, but There's been an uptick in ERISA violation lawsuits. So you may have heard of the Johnson & Johnson lawsuit, some of the others where either employees are suing employers or employers are suing third-party administrators, things like that. There's lots of discussion around what it means to be a fiduciary in the context of group health and what obligations you have in terms of maintaining clear and conspicuous contracts, making sure you understand where your premium dollars are going, and making sure you're actually getting the best deals for your business, for your employees, and that all of the dollars are going where they're supposed to. So a lot of these are surrounding particularly things like PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, and how those rebate dollars or administration fees from manufacturers and from plan sponsors come together to maybe not get the best deals for some people. So under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, it tends to be an employee suing an employer for violations and then kind of dragging along all of these third-party administrators, PBMs, other actors that are maybe the actual bad actor, but there still has to be a cause of action for this lawsuit. So you sue who you can and hope the right people get drug into it.
It's the best you can hope for, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of suing who you can, the next one we'll go into is star rating lawsuits. This was a really big deal last year. We will see a lot of changes and effects to Medicare Advantage plans because of that. We did have a podcast episode regarding star ratings, so I definitely recommend if you want to learn a little bit more about how star ratings affect carriers and how that works, reference that particular episode. But essentially, carriers did sue CMS in regards to how they calculated their star ratings for 2024, which affects their bottom line, how much the government is giving those carriers. So UHC did win the 2025 star rating lawsuit.
Yep.
The results actually came in November 2024, saying that CMS needed to go back and reevaluate star ratings for this year, which is very confusing. But
Indeed.
we will see additional scrutiny about that. The main reason that they won was things like data flaws, analyzing data, basically misrepresentation, things like that. So we will see a lot of that, and that in turn goes into how carriers can plan benefits, can plan products, and where and when the products are available. So we may see a lot of changes on that as well in the next year.
Absolutely. And sometimes you got to understand these lawsuits are a lot of finger pointing. Sometimes, like, for example, this most recent lawsuit in January, where Aetna is actually suing a number of drug manufacturers over an alleged price fixing scheme, saying that these drug makers conspired to overcharge for generic drugs. Some folks say, yes, this is absolutely true. Obviously, this is happening. It's a great lawsuit. Some folks think that it is a way to kind of defer blame for the heavy scrutiny of pharmacy benefit managers that Aetna and others are facing right now. Regardless, it's going to be a big case this year as they look to see, was there a conspiracy to thwart competition for generic drugs? Did it cause prices to go up artificially? And did it create actual harm to, in this case, to Aetna? But at the end of the day, we're looking at, did it harm beneficiaries? So a lot of really interesting lawsuits over the past year that will likely play out during the Trump administration. And again, with many of those judges that were appointed by Trump in the first Trump administration that may be hearing some of these cases.
Mm-hmm. So another carrier lawsuit, we've got a couple carrier lawsuits we'll call out. Regards mental health. That's another big theme. I don't see it. It started off, it's been kind of a theme the last couple presidencies. We'll continue to see mental health continue to be a big theme. Another call out to a podcast we did specifically on mental health. But Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield did get sued. It is in a class action lawsuit as of October 2024, going over the directory for mental health. Essentially, the whole scheme around it is that it's a ghost network. It doesn't actually exist, so people who are enrolling in that plan are not actually getting to go see providers because there is no network.
Yep.
So that will be interesting, and we'll see kind of a theme, I think, of just a lot more digging into carriers and PBMs and all sorts of things, just where are the checks and balances on things.
Absolutely.
That's definitely going to be something we'll see in the future, but this particular lawsuit is on a ghost network and doesn't actually exist, and people are enrolling in plans with the assumption and expectation that they can go see people and they can't.
And I think that's a trend we'll continue to see as more people, it's no surprise that public perception of insurance right now is not at an all-time high, and people are getting very frustrated. So I think we'll continue to see more lawsuits like this, whether they come from individuals or whether they come from, say, the Department of Justice, is yet to be seen. But even within the government, which we'll talk a little more about in the executive and legislative chapters of this series, while there's a lot of pro-Medicare Advantage sentiment, pro-insurance industry sentiment, pro-business sentiment, there's also this idea that maybe we're not getting as good a deal as we think we are. Some of the budget hawks, deficit hawks are really looking at, are there ways we can still expand the MA program while also cutting costs and making sure we're getting what we pay for? And I think that's something we'll continue to see play out maybe in the courts, maybe in Congress. But regardless, it's going to be a busy next 4 years. Going back into more specific lawsuits, obviously United Healthcare, they've been involved in several lawsuits over the past few years. The biggest one being the Change Health cyberware attack or ransomware attack that affected millions of people, as well as the DOJ lawsuit over some of their acquisitions, some antitrust lawsuits. You get to be the largest company in the health insurance game, you're going to face lawsuits, especially on the antitrust side.
For sure.
As you try to make acquisitions, it's just part of the deal at that point.
You see that with like every industry. If you're the big player, you're going to get majority of the lawsuits, and UHC is the biggest one. So there is an example for other carriers across the board. And you probably saw a lot of your clients in the past year going, is this real? Because they were getting mail
numbers,
about the
Medicare numbers.
New Medicare numbers, mail saying that their data had been jeopardized, things like that. So that was the trickle-down effect. And unfortunately, I don't see ransomware and any sort of cyber attack ending anytime in the near future. So that I think is going to continue to be a trend with carriers getting potentially brought to court because of that.
Absolutely. And I would say don't think it can't happen to you. Go back and look at some of our episodes on growing your agency and look at some of the notes we have on cybersecurity, some of the notes we have on properly insuring your business to make sure you're protected against something like that. It is, we're talking a lot about these huge corporations, but don't think for a minute that there's not also a lot of issues with like the FCC and some of the new one-to-one consent and communications rules. There's still a lot of things that the average small business owner is up against that is going to play out in the courts. And especially when you're talking about things like class actions, as it's more and more common for agents to work in multiple states where bringing a federal case makes more sense. Some of these could affect you directly as well. So make sure you're protected. Look back on some of those other episodes on protecting and preparing your agency to grow. And I want to talk a little bit about outcomes again. I know we backtracked to that earlier, but there's one that we didn't talk about. So obviously we can resolve a case. Someone can win, someone can lose. We can have that injunction or stay that temporarily bars someone from taking an action. But the other thing that can and does often happen is a case can just get thrown out or dismissed. That can happen for any number of reasons. The most common one being that either the person suing does not have standing to sue. They don't have a legitimate cause of action to sue the defendant, meaning they either haven't actually experienced harm, or they don't have the authority to sue that individual or entity that they're suing. And then, of course, sometimes there's just not case law supporting the cause of action that they want to take, and those cases can be dismissed.
100%. Sorry, I thought we had gone through I think I might have
skipped that one.
So this is the fun part of the episode. This is when we go into a little bit more speculation and ripple effects with the Trump era, which is kind of a unique situation because we haven't seen a president have a gap between their second term presidency. So we can see a lot of
long time.
From a very long time. I think Reagan was before that. It was a while ago. It's been a while. So it was 60 plus years when I was looking at it. So, but essentially we've got a gap year. So we've got a lot of judges that Trump had implemented and appointed. And now we get to see the ripple effect, at least for the next 2, maybe 4 years, where House and Senate both have majority Republicans. One of the things that we were looking at, he has appointed more He has appointed more judges in his first term than we have seen in a very long time for one-term president. So looking back, he did 226 appointed judges, which is amazing because if you look at the previous two presidents, Barack and George W. Bush, they appointed 320 and 322.
So that was across 2 terms.
And that was across 2 terms. Yeah, that's where I was going. Opposed to like the last one-term presidents, the last one was George H.W. Bush. He did 187. So he has appointed a lot of judges that can then have that ripple effect of more Republican-prone outcomes, more business-related.
Definitely a trend.
Pro-business and go ahead.
No, definitely a trend to appoint more conservative judges. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Appointing, 54 judges to the Court of Appeals and then those remaining are district court judges. It is definitely something that has already created a lasting legacy. Unlike any president since Ronald Reagan, Trump had the opportunity to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices during his first term in office. It is not impossible to think that he may be able to appoint another during his second term.
That's what it was. It was the most appointed Supreme Court judges since Ronald Reagan. That's where I was thinking Ronald Reagan. I was like, I saw that. Who appointed 4. So yeah, he's definitely had a big influence on the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So again, no surprise that definitely more conservative judges, some demographic breakdowns we found, he actually appointed more women judges than the past 2 conservative presidents, and then appointed about 1 in 6 that were non-white judges. So very interesting to see kind of the breakdown of the appointees of Trump and seeing some of the big cases that they've already been involved in. Again, namely things like Loper Bright, things that extended beyond that first term presidency and into the Biden administration presidency. So we've looked at a lot of this, these judge appointments that have been a big win for small business, particularly looking at like the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It has gotten a lot of attention. It's a really common place to file a lot of big pro-business lawsuits. 17 active judges on that court, and 6 of them were appointed by Trump. Now, of course, some of those other judges are still very conservative as well, but having nearly a third or almost exactly a third of the judges on that court being appointed by a single president definitely makes for a pretty concentrated influence when you think about the types of appointments he was making. So looking at that.
I was going to say the next things that we're looking through is just different Department of Justice appointments. Because of that, he started seeing a lot of ripple effect with drug pricing. We may see additional lawsuits throughout the year about that. I don't see that going away through the Trump era.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, already talked a little bit about things like, during Trump's first term, the most favored nation pricing was a big talking point. So already talking about that again, already seeing starting to see rumblings of what may be happening during the second Trump administration. But yeah, absolutely. The Trump DOJ may drive the bus on some of these changes as we look at, who might they go after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of the big talking points, I think are going to be price transparency and how that works. So price transparency, and then also just drug pricing. That's already started that ripple effect with the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot of things that are going to just continue from Trump era on, because we've got that gap year with now a lot more judges appointed by Trump that we actually get to see in fruition. So I think this is going to be a really unique presidency just to see through what his actions did 8 years ago all the way through his presidency coming.
Absolutely. So judicial branch is definitely one of the more interesting discussions we're going to have, because there's not a ton of things we can do other than watch and see. We can't lobby or influence the judges in a particular manner very effectively. So this is definitely more informational. But with these 3 branches of government, we're obviously expecting some big shifts in policy over the Biden administration, some big changes in priorities and how they approach healthcare and Medicare in particular. But with this episode focusing on some of these major lawsuits, focusing on the judiciary as it was under the first Trump administration, it's no doubt that there's going to be some big impacts to the insurance and Medicare industries under the second Trump administration. And next time, we'll talk a little bit about the executive branch and where we see that going under Trump too.